quite informal part of our, although we set up here very formally, of our Wampanoag Perspective project, which is an arts counselling and funded project with supporting funding from Nottinghamshire County Council and Bassetlaw District Council. So we're having, we're delighted to have our guests with us, and I think I'll get you guys to introduce yourselves before I rattle on any further.
I'm Stephen Peters. I am a citizen of the Wampanoag tribe.
Troy Currents. I belong to the Hartman tribe. Hartman and Mark. Good evening. My name is Hartman. I'm from the Wampanoag tribe.
Good evening. My name is Mark Harding. I am also a citizen of the Wampanoag tribe, a direct descendant of my grandfather, who was the chief of the Hartman tribe also.
So we're cousins.
Thanks, guys. So we've got 600 or so primary school children coming over to the museum to see us this week, and we wanted that to be an opportunity for the public, but also particularly for older students to ask you guys some questions and really engage with the project as well. So I've got some questions that they submitted, and then we'll open the floor a bit later to any questions you guys who are with us have as well. Okay, so I'll get started. We know that Wampanoag means people of the first light. Is this linked to your location on the east coast of America, and what is the tradition behind the name?
It is linked to our location. We believe that we see the sunrise first, so that's where our name comes from. We also have many ceremonies that start at sunrise, but we believe it's a powerful start to the day.
Thank you. This is more of a personal one, so I don't know if you're going to each have your own response to this. Did you have to make the Pledge of Allegiance to the US flag in school, and how did you feel about that?
That's a tough question. Is our government watching right now? I feel like NSA is tapped somewhere. We do. You know, at school, growing up, you're forced to do some things that necessarily don't align with the history that you understand. You're forced to pledge allegiance to the flag. It's something I had to do as a kid. It's something my mother never told me was wrong, and she allowed me to sort of learn history as I grew up, and then sort of form my own opinions about things like Thanksgiving, Christopher Columbus Day. I mean, those are far more, I would say, egregious events that occur in your schooling as opposed to the Pledge of Allegiance. But yeah, that's something that my mother allowed me to sort of explore in other ways that you have to do outside of school.
How are you? For me, I grew up as a military brat. I actually lived here about 30 years ago. And so I've always had respect for the military and armed forces. But coming from a background that both my parents are both Black and Native American, my dad's Catawba, my mom is Wampanoag. As time has went on and everything's happened with COVID, you see Black Lives Matter, everything like that. And my daughter is an activist and stuff. I really have a hard time standing for that flag. I see it differently. I feel that, you know, they sing the nice, happy line, you know, and by the time you get to the second verse, if you ever look that song up, you would be horrified as a woman, a person of color, or, you know, so I stand sometimes and don't put my heart up in my hand. That's even if I stand. Yeah, I have really mixed feelings when I see the flag, especially after who's last person charging me? I don't know. Yeah, sorry. So I mean, it means different things as I've gotten older. As a kid, you were like, hey, yes. As you get older, you travel and see the world, and you can see different people, and you realize everyone's saying America's greatness. Growing up outside the United States and living overseas, and my experience is very different, and I got to see so many different cultures and people, and I have a total respect for other people other than Americans. Not that I don't love our country, but I see us more as equal. Not we're more superior than the other.
We were expected to stand and say Pledge of Allegiance in school when I was a kid. But I got some pretty early educations about what this country did to Native people. I remember when I was about 5 years old, there was Lone Ranger. It was a Western-themed show that was on television. And I really liked Lone Ranger because they had the character Tonto, and he was a Native person you could actually see on television, and that meant a lot to me. And they came out with a line of toys to go with the show, the Lone Ranger action figures. And at one point, I had gotten a, what's his name, Buffalo Bill action figure. He had a leather fringed jacket with a hat and blonde hair. And I was playing with him, and I was so excited about my new toy. And I remember my father came home at that point in time, and I was really excited to show him my new toy. And I showed him my new toy, and he looked down, and he got mad as hell. He says, "Who bought my son this custard doll? I ain't gonna have my kid playing with no custard dolls in his house." And he proceeded to get into an argument with my grandmother, who had bought me the toy, about Custer. And I learned about how Custer made an attempt to win a presidency by killing Indians. And he did that under the red, white, and blue star-spangled banner flag of the United States. And I learned that this is what the United States has always done to Native people. And so early on, I learned to be a rebel. And I learned about the ugly underbelly of what the American military has done to Native people. And in my lifetime, I've seen what the American military continues to do to Native people. They talked about, with some of these recent protests, oh my God, when was the last time you saw the American military deployed against American people? It's been so long. It's got to have been since, whatever, 1930s, 1830s. But for me, I realized that it was just, 2016 when I saw the American military deployed against the people with Standing Rock. And I was there to witness it myself. They were deployed against me. And that's something I've been fully aware of, and I've never stood for the Pledge of Allegiance in spite of jeers and contempt pointed my way. I don't have any allegiance to the flag of the United States. They are an occupying force of my homeland. They are occupiers. They are colonizers. Colonization is one nation's attempt to dispossess another nation of their rightful inheritance. And that's what the United States continues to do. To this day, even as the COVID began, they attempted to take away and strip us of our last 1% that we still continue to hold on to of our homeland. So this is not stopped. It's not a thing of the past. It's a thing of the present. It's a thing of now. And, how can I pledge allegiance to the very nation that seeks to destroy me? And I don't, and I won't.
You get to follow that up.
Yes, of course. I have a few more decades on these youngsters, as you probably could notice. I was a child in the 60s, and I grew up, learning that the best way to defend ourselves, especially during the Cold War, was to sit under your desk in school and be a good student when they had a particular exercise, when there's a threat of a nuclear weapon going off. And now we have children still doing that today in America, when they are during a drill for when there's a possible time where somebody could become an active shooter in our schools. So there's a lot of things that haven't changed in America. We just go from one fear to the next. For myself, learning and being part of the United States was a different experience. I grew up pretty much in my neighborhood. Mashpee, Wampanoag are, and our Herring Pond, down where my grandparents were, and spent some time with them. But it was quite different, as most would realize from the 60s. As I've gotten older, I've learned that some of the beliefs that I was taught at that time, of course, weren't the proper way, and we've realized that. One of the things that I've always been able to do is walk within the same corridors as the occupiers, and I've been able to make an influence difference by being at the table. So my perspective is a little different than my relative nephew, but I still try to get the same results by being there at that point.
Thank you all for sharing such personal experiences. Our next question came in from Tuxford Academy, and they were wondering, what one thing do you wish all American students were taught about in school that might develop tolerance and inclusivity? And do you think this would be as valid to learn about in British schools?
The kids have amazing questions. We've been seeing it all day as they come in, and Hartman's been leading the discussions with them as well. Very, very thoughtful. I'd have to say for me, I think the one thing I wish we had learned about more was Christopher Columbus. I think it's egregious that we allow our children to this day to continue to grow up thinking that this man came and found a country, that one had prior contact for centuries before that. But it makes no sense. And it just perpetuates through every other piece of history that you're taught about after that as well. So I think if we can't get that piece correct, it just continues to make bigger issues for everyone down the road.
You don't like Christopher Columbus?
No.
It's not mine either.
Bad man.
So for me, when you start talking about history, when we were in school, I'm sure that somebody's got to tell you the same thing. You get to Christopher Columbus, and you skip it to the founding fathers, and then you go on to the Civil War, and everything is very about white people. There's so many different varieties of color, people, and human beings that are left out. So when you're left out of the story, you don't feel like you're part of the story. You don't feel like you're included. You're not part of the nation. During American history, there was women, right? And a lot of women were left out. You know, they discovered things, so they get any credit, and they get the white guys to tell you that you knew what you were talking about. So women took a backseat till what, the 1940s or something? There's plenty of black people who discovered a lot of things that saved a lot of people's lives around the world. Don't hear about them. You know, I hear about them because my parents instilled that into me. I have Asian family members which had Japan. Different things that they've done and left out of the history books. I mean, you know, Native people, obviously, you know, helped you guys how to live and all these things. We get no credit, none, you know. All we do is live and learn. Okay, on to the next thing. Let's do the railroad, you know. Concentration camps, praying towns, and it's like, they don't really want to talk about the awful things that took place. That's about an issue. You can't leave that part out. Because when you're leaving that part out, you're disenfranchising other people who already left out, and they want to be included. You know, so I think we need to go back to the drawing board and teach all that. Because, you know, you can't have the good without the bad. So you can learn from your history. If you're not going to go back in history and learn, you know, and you're not going to update your knowledge, you know, that's operating on an old manual, old instructions. If someone gets better instructions than you, right, and you're operating in the dark ages, they're going to be looking at you like you're crazy. You know, your manual's out of date. It's time to reboot and update your firmware. I mean, that's about it. So you don't keep making the same mistakes over and over. You know, you don't look at where you came from. What do you know where you're going? So, I mean, that's just how I feel about it.
I mean, seriously, I think they should be taught on economics and self-sufficiency. These are some basic skills that our kids are really lacking, how to function in society, pay bills and deal with their credit and all these other things. But, when we talk about things that are relevant to Native people in particular, I am so tired of our story starting with the arrival of Europeans. We have 12,000 years of history in the Americas, 20,000, 30,000 down in South America. There's so much that has gone on well before Europeans arrived in our part of the world. If you look at the history of any land, it doesn't start when somebody else arrived. If you look at European history, does it start when we showed up this week? If you look at, does it start when the Khans arrived and invaded? Does it start, when the Persians tried to take over Greece? No, there's the story of the people that are there. That's the story of the land. And we have so much history that is just simply skipped over. And we start with the arrival of European people. Almost every U.S. textbook history that you open up begins in Europe. How is that? How is that the story of our people in that land? It's not. It's the story of European colonization and conquest. And I just wish that we would actually teach the story of the people of that land. It includes all of the things that came with it, people who came over the generations, but a whole story that starts with us. Because, we are the first people of that land.
Being people of that land, we were the first to be displaced. And it still continues today, even up to 4 years ago when we're working on moving our economic development forward. The former guy, as I like to refer to him as, came in and tried to take our trust land away and told his Secretary of Interior to dispose of the Wampanoag Reservation. 4 years ago. The history that should be taught to the people today should be that America was built on stolen land and indentured by Native Americans, and then when they couldn't find any more use for us, they brought in Africans. So a country built on stolen land and slavery, but that's what makes America great.
Thank you. Have you found, I suppose really, do you find that the younger Wampanoag generation are engaged with and interested in the history of their ancestors?
I think our kids are extremely interested in our history and traditions. There are growing opportunities to share that in new ways, thanks to social media, the websites that we have now. We don't have to rely on, the 5 media channels that can push out whatever message and narrative that they want. We have new ways that we can get communication out. And I see everyone, not just our kids, but I see everybody with a genuine interest in hearing perspective that they weren't necessarily aware of. So there's a lot of interest, I think, from the kids now. What we continue to be challenged with, though, even with these new forms of communication, is an overwhelming tidal wave of media that comes from movies, television, sitcoms, sports teams and their mascots that continue to perpetuate stereotypes that we're trying to erase and battle because of what we've had for the past 300 years. That continues to have an impact on our kids and us today. And so we can try and share that with them, but there's a tidal wave that comes over it, and that can be a bit saddening as a Native American, especially with 2 young kids as well, to know, even though all of the work that we're doing right now, to know that my own son can't turn the television on and see anybody that relates to his Native perspective. He can't watch a movie and necessarily see anyone that he relates with on that level. And so I think they're forced to try and find other ways to identify with who they are as a person in this society. And that's very challenging. I don't know where he's going to be when he's my age. I hope he's in a better place. I think we've made some steps forward, but we have an enormous amount of work to do to erase that systemic racism. You know, those unconscious, immediate, thoughts that we create when we meet somebody or we hear that they're Native American or African American or they're a woman or they're a man or they're from, this gender. We immediately form these ideas in our head that I think came from, that constant push of media that it's just all around us. So, we're there. I think they have an interest for it, but there's a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Steve. We have another question from Tuxford Academy. What are some of the challenges you have found regarding maintaining and celebrating your own culture while living as part of or alongside a different one? I think you kind of just answered that, really. Do you want to add anything? Or?
We look at the standard holidays in the United States, and they're very much set up around, the white Christian norms. So for myself, I try to engage in the ceremony of our traditional belief system, and I've found it always challenging because you have to get time off that's considered irregular, and to actually function. Everybody gets a break for Christmas, but what's Christmas to me? Do I get the same consideration for observing the full moon and the new moon? I don't. Do I get the same consideration for celebrating the strawberries coming in? I don't. Do I get the same consideration for celebrating the maple sugar? I don't. And so the fact that there's a systematic setup, once again, that favors one group of people over the other, and as a Native person, my ability to engage with the world is oftentimes at odds with the schedule of the rest of the world and what they expect me to be a productive member of society. And that's one of the problems that I see that we come across.
We have a question from the University of St Andrews. Someone's asking, how do you feel about stereotypical notions of Thanksgiving in the US, and what can be done to further spread awareness of Indigenous perspectives?
I think that's probably something that we can all talk about. It's a confusing topic for me specifically to talk about because there's sort of 2 parts to it. There's one is our National Day of Mourning. So there's an event that's been held now for over 50 years. At the 350th commemoration of the Mayflower Crossing, we had an Aquina Wampanoag who was asked to write a speech by the Mayflower descendants, and he wrote that speech and was prepared to give it, but when these descendants read the speech, they were like, holy crap, you can't say that. Nobody will stick around in our hall and, everyone will hate us. So they asked him to censor his speech. He was like, no, I'm not going to censor what I said. So he went and gave it uncensored at the top of Pulse Hill, which overlooks Plymouth Rock. And that started the National Day of Mourning. We continue that today with there's a protest that's held. We continue to hold that protest, one, because there are just human rights that aren't being met. For women, children, Native Americans, land rights, the rights to live off the land the way that we understand it. And it's happening all over the world. So people come there and take that time to challenge the problems that we saw in society. And until those are fixed, I think the National Day of Mourning will continue. Then after that, we go and have a huge dinner with our family. We have turkey, we have cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes. I mean, you name it, because there's no work. So you got the whole day off after that. And to not take time to sit down with your family and enjoy each other's company would be something lost, you know? And people often ask me, like, well, do you think we should get rid of Thanksgiving? I'm kind of like, no, I think we should have more Thanksgivings, you know, not just one. And also as well, we try and remind people of actually where Thanksgiving came from, which really isn't that harvest festival in 1621. There's a whole bunch of issues with that. So, you know, there's those two things that are sort of all going on at the same time as a Native American. And so it becomes a little bit challenging and confusing for me.
I have to follow it up.
Yeah,
That was a very good answer. And it's kind of what Stephen's saying. We walk in two moccasins, you know, we walk in the celebration of Thanksgiving with your friends and family. You have the day off to eat and watch American football.
Yeah, best sport in the world.
But a lot of us, we get up in the morning when, you know, the sun comes up and we say our prayers and different things like that. Some of us smudge different things and text each other, hey, are you going to the statue overlooking the harbor? And most of us are. Some of us get there so that we can celebrate and say prayers and sing songs for our ancestors. And that day we're lucky to even be there. We're fortunate to be here. All this stuff has happened to us. Our ancestors have been a lot for us to be in this place. And it's our duty to come and be there for them. Because they went through all those things so that we can be here. That's why it's we're even sitting here. All the pain and suffering that they've been exposed to and had to deal with. And we owe that to them. And that's why we celebrate that day and we wanted to go there. And there were much people. But so it's an emotional day. For me, I was on my way to Plymouth Rock, overlooking the harbor. I stopped along our old area around the Heron Pond, and I spent time with my grandfather to give me words and inspire me and my other relatives there. Help me go on and face the day and cope with different things for inspiration to move on in a good way. Because those things are important to us.
I'm going to echo what some of the other folks have said here, that we need more Thanksgivings. Traditionally, Wampanoag people have 13 Thanksgivings a year. It's not just one. And those, to give thanks for all the things the world has given us is really important. But how do you be thankful? How are you truly thankful? Talk is cheap. Even the brokest people can afford it. So what is it to say, oh, Thanksgiving, thanks Indians for giving us land. But how do you actually act thankful? And what we haven't seen is any true thankfulness in action, manner, demeanor from the greater American public for what we did give up, for them to be here and to be there. We're not here anymore as far as sometimes I have to remember that and grounding myself. But it's not if I grab something out of your hand and say thanks and punch you in the face. What the words matter? That's not acting thankful. The words don't mean anything if they're not backed up by action. So that's why I see the American Thanksgiving and the Pilgrims and Indians, hokey plays where they act like putting a trash bag on a kid is somehow representative of our culture, that's not thankful. That's not appreciative. And that's why I see the way that the American celebration of Thanksgiving is what it is to me when I look at it.
As Troy was saying, it's about our ancestors, the ones that came before us, the ones that stood up, the ones that suffered. We look at all the children today, and it was a point that was brought up yesterday, and there was a question asked of the children. Do you have a cemetery next to your school? And they couldn't answer that. When they took our children and they brought them to the boarding schools, we lost a lot of souls. There was a lot of children that were buried at those schools. Never came back. They were never able to grow up and to have a family and to have ancestors of their own. And that's what makes us suffer so much. The things, the atrocities that happened to our people over these centuries was just deplorable. And today, being able to celebrate the glory of the false holidays is just so cruel, even to everyone.
Thank you all for answering a question that's clearly so raw, and we British are famously bad at dealing with emotion, but we deserve to listen through this, and this is an opportunity for us to learn, so thank you so much. Tuxford Academy are asking, do different Native American nations have very different cultures? And what are some of the things that make the culture of the Wampanoag Nation so special?
Our cultures and traditions really vary based on our surrounding, based on what's around us. So to understand our culture and traditions is to understand the environment that we live in. We make use of everything that is around us, and we look for the cycle that will not only take but also give back to that environment as well, because we see ourselves as just another piece of that circle. And that's why there absolutely would vary from tribe to tribe, from nation to nation, their traditions, their home styles, their diet would all be dependent on the environment that they are part of, not the environment that they dominate, but the environment that they live in harmony with. So I hope that helps into that.
Yeah, there's the concept that there's a Native American ethnic group, but the truth of the matter is that there's a good number of ethnic groups that are lumped together as Native American. For us as Eastern Algonquin people, we have sister tribes all around us: Bassetlaw, Penobscot, Mi'kmaq, Narragansett, Pequot, Mohegan, Shinnecock are all sister tribes, and we're all what's now considered New England. But as soon as you cross the Hudson, I mean, we're all in New England. We can speak sister language as each other, have similar form of governance, similar family structure, the name for grandmother, the name for the creator, our similar spirituality. But as soon as you cross the Hudson, you end up into Iroquois territory. They have a whole different language, as different as English and Chinese. And they speak sister languages with each other, and they can understand each other quite well, but they have different customs and beliefs and traditions. I know that, I remember Cinnamon not being able to be around any part of a bear. We have no problems with being around bears, or any part of a bear. And so that's, a distinction between us. You end up down in Navajo, and they're desert people, and it's considered very taboo to
look at snakes, and that's not a part of our culture. So if you see a snake, you're supposed to avert your eyes. You know, I know as well for the Iroquois people that they have these masks, these false face masks that they treat with such reverence that you're not supposed to look at them unless you're able to offer them what they need. You're supposed to feed these masks and offer it, you know, treat it like a living elder. And, you know, for us, this is just a, you know, this does not have that same impact on us. And yet, you know, for them, if they see it and it's not being treated right, they have to cleanse themselves and have to go through ritual because they've, you know, put their eyes on it without being able to make these offerings. But there are lots of particulars for Wampanoag people, and you know, so many different things. You know, for us, we believe that the owl is a being that brings us medicine for love because it sings at night. And for the Lakota people, they think that this is a warning of death. So very drastically different how people react to owls or owl feathers in the circle. You know, so if you end up out in the Great Plains, if you have owl feathers, you're going to be shunned and turned around, and people are going to, you know, be offended by that. But for us, of course, this is a whole different thing. This is, you know, this is about love. And so, you know, it's a very different thing. So, you know, very wide varieties in cultures between different people. And you know, the land is certainly part of it, but you also get these, you know, spiritual and cultural differences of the intangible that can be drastically different as well.
Thank you. Our next question sort of touch on what Steve was talking about. So we have a few questions about biodiversity and protecting the environment. So that's one of those. Many of our students are concerned about the future of our environment. Would you have any thoughts regarding living a more sustainable life that works in harmony with our environment rather than damaging it?
I'm so glad to hear that our kids are concerned for our environment. I gotta be honest, I am petrified that the damage is done. That the damage to our water is too far gone. You know, we live in a place that's on a peninsula, and so for us, water is as important as the air. You can't live that. But where we live now, we're just having conversations around our town where people are like, oh, wow, like the water really is bad. Oh, you mean I can't go swimming right now in the pond because there's an algae that's so bad that I'll get sick and be in the hospital? And so you know, we've been screaming about this for generations. Our grandfather was, you know, seeing these problems well before any of this, but nobody wanted to wake up to it. What we need to do now is be able to really look at those problems and find sustainable ways to address them. Those are really, really big questions. I don't have a degree in, you know, that sort of thing, but what you can do is start thinking about decreasing your footprint and starting to live more harmonious with everything around you rather than always taking. Look for ways to give back. I don't know what else, unfortunately, to say, but I think we're in a bad spot right now.
So for the last 20-some odd years, we've had a military base that is right next to our reservation. I've worked pretty diligently to correct some of the problems that have occurred over there during the course of the 40s and 50s and for that simple mistake of just tipping over the barrel. But that happens everywhere. The only reason that it was actually corrected on Cape Cod is because we had Ted Kennedy and some other very important people that it affected them also. And they said, well, we have to make this right. It wasn't so much for the Wampanoag that was, still, under the poison that was still seeping into the ground all around their home territory, but it was more so for them. One of the things that I still do is I still help other tribes with their resiliency and their environmental issues to be able to ensure that they have the ability to take care of themselves in the future, not only for the children, but for the future generations of children, and to ensure that their footprint and their greenhouse gas emissions, to take those down to a level where it's more manageable for everybody. Tribes have always done that more so than other folks. There's been a time in the last 20 years where a lot of Native American tribes, and I'm not saying all of them, but they've had some leaps and bounds in economic development, whether it be in hotels or golf courses or casinos. But those are all industries that require a big footprint. So now a lot of the tribes are taking a good look at that and saying, hey, how can we reduce, reuse, and repurpose some of the things that are harming the environment? And we're seeing a quick turnaround on all of those things within our tribal nations. So we will try a little bit harder every day. We're all going to work. We're all going to make it.
And I think we need to address some of the core values that we teach teach in our schools and these next generations. It's great to hear the kids notice. And I'm sure that they think about it heavily because it's them that's going to be impacted the most. They are the ones who are going to suffer the consequences of the actions that we take on today. But we have to get away from this idea of teaching competition, greed, and selfishness, which is often what we teach. And when we teach these as if greed is a value, as if selfishness is a value, then of course we're going to end up with the problems that greed, selfishness, and competition breed. And a lot of those things are about what benefits me, myself personally, without worrying about how it impacts your neighbor or your competition or the other folks that may get in your way. And if we think about a collective sense of who we are and what we need, and think about that we have enough in this world. We don't need to have another pipeline. We don't need to have another billionaire. There is enough in this world that we can all survive if we aren't trying to undercut the next person so that we can have more. And so these values really have to be addressed and changed. And we have to start looking at what this short-term gains are actually getting us. And what do we want for a world? Do we want a future, or do we just want to die rich? We can't take it with us. So what's the point? After you have enough, how much more do you need? So we have to start teaching enoughness. We have to start teaching cooperation, collaboration. We have to start empowering our kids to know that they have the answers within themselves. And these things are really important because oftentimes we're taught to divert to some authority or somebody who has power, that we don't have enough, that there's a scarcity, that we have to go and get more and more and more and more and more. And we are on a limited system. We are on one planet. All that we will have is already here. How do we want to use it? So I think we have to start reconceptualizing the very core values that we have as a society and what core values we want to teach as a society to the next generation coming up.
So it's not like you see this table and that jug of water. You're looking beyond that, and that's more or less what everyone has said here. Your stay here on planet Earth is temporary. You're preparing stuff for the people to follow after you, and if you don't take that attitude, there's not going to be nothing here.
Thank you all, that was really inspiring. The next question is about trying to find out whether you guys feel you have a voice. So we've just heard what impact your opinions would have, and I think it would be great if you did have more of a voice. So does the Wampanoag Nation feel that they have a valued and meaningful voice in the democratic processes? And what changes would need to be made to ensure that people are represented in a just and fair way?
No. I don't know that there's any other way to really say that other than no. We do not. The issues that we have in our government are widespread. Obviously, as Native Americans, we are considered to be a minority within a minority. And so with that, we carry very little weight in the federal government. And to move anything through the government requires an enormous amount of money. And that's how it operates. There's no other way. You either pay for it or it doesn't get done. And so our way of operating is obviously in direct conflict with that. And so we have very little to no say. In fact, I would say that we have the opposite of no say. We have things being taken away from us still consistently. That's how little weight we carry in the federal government.
Yeah, no, we don't have a voice. Simply put, we don't. I think there's the whole drastic approach of ousting the occupiers. That's, one thing, but we could also have to deal with reality. Is that going to happen? Probably not in my lifetime. Could we oust this jurisdictional authority of the United States? I'd be happy to take on most of my neighbors as citizens as Wampanoag. They're willing to abide by our rules. Most of them, not all of them. Beyond that though, as tribal governments, we are the preeminent, pre-existing governments of the land. We are the original title holders of the land. We are supposed to have jurisdictional authority of an equal standing as a state, and yet we do not have senators. We do not have congresspeople. Why not? They say there's no taxation without representation, and yet we're taxed. We are supposed to have jurisdictional authority over our territory, and yet we have no representative in the federal system. We're supposed to be equal to a state, and yet we have no say in the system. So I think on a realistic, short-term level, I think that tribes need to have representatives in Senate and in Congress, just as a state would. I think that would fix a whole lot. So I think that's something that realistically we might be able to aim for and shoot for, and maybe when I'm as old as Mark here, maybe we can see something like that.
No. I was a former elected official of our tribe, our nation. So I spent a little bit of time walking the halls of Congress and the Senate. It was a quick lesson on really how the U.S. government works. And it's probably not much different than most governments throughout the world. But Congress basically relies upon other people to tell them how to vote. And the other people that tell them how to vote usually have their coffers for their re-election campaign. So we have a method, I guess it's called legal bribery, but it's called lobbying. in the United States. And you're a registered lobbyist, and you're able to go to these wonderful little breakfasts and drop off checks of $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 for your favorite congressman. And with that, of course, you get to be able to write some rules whenever they need them, whether it be insurance or banking or the gun lobby. That's how our government is run. We don't have that representation. And until such time as that when they change the rules that you can only be in Congress for a short period of time, we're going to continue to see that same, just every election cycle, you're going to have really no viable candidates that would be of the right. There are some tribes that have their own lobbyists, and those are the ones that are usually very successful in their economic development. But because the fact that they have that economic development, i.e. hotels, casinos, golf courses, shopping malls, they're able to play the game. So it's really not a level playing field for all of the tribes, but there's probably maybe 100 or so of those tribes that are able to be at that level. So the other 472 just don't have that ability to get up, farther than where they're at right now. So.
Thank you. I feel like if some voices from a small town in North Nottinghamshire might help with what Hartman said, you tell us where to write to and to have a few letters coming in after this evening. I don't know if it would do any good, but we can try. We have a question from the Elizabethan Academy, which is one of the schools here in Retford. They're asking what is being done by schools in the US to improve tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. Do you think it's working, and what do you think else might need to be done?
I think there's a real movement to try and update the curriculum in schools. There's an interest, at least on the teacher level, that they want to do that. Unfortunately, there's not the resources on the back end to actually execute on that wish to update the curriculum and have curriculum that was provided in the voice, in the perspective of the people that they are talking about. So right now there's interest in it, but there's not a sustained movement to update that curriculum that they use to teach to their kids.
Politics. Instead of teaching the right history, it turns into politics. Pointing sides, finger pointing. I was trying to say that, you're bad because you're Republican or Caucasian. That we just want to be taught the right history. It's went from teaching the right thing to politics. Shouldn't matter. And it does to them.
Yeah, I think that what they're doing to increase tolerance is to silence people, because that's always really effective. When the idea of having a curriculum that includes teaching tolerance or accurate history comes up, there's been a pushback of trying to pass laws even at this point, banning the teaching of anything considered critical race theory. Oh, how scary. Yeah. So the actual fact of the matter is it's not tolerance that's being taught, it's intolerance. And the push is to see more intolerance. And that's what we're seeing, from the bureaucratic level and from the political level. And this is, as Stephen was saying, there's an effort, I think, in a large part, from the teachers and educators themselves to build tolerance and acceptance. But your job depends on pleasing the people who write your paychecks. And if you're going to teach these truths and these this matter of acceptance and this matter of equality, you might risk your livelihood for it, then you're probably going to shy away from it. And that's what we're seeing right now as we speak. It's a big debate in the States.
Mashpee's a little different. We've been very fortunate that the town of Mashpee does have some federal money that's available that does teach a little bit more about Indian education than most towns or even surrounding communities. But one of the best things about Mashpee itself is that Mashpee Wampanoag have their own school. And my wife and I have had a pair of twins that we've been taking care of for the last 4.5 years. And now they're 8 years old. But for the very first 3 years of school, we sent them to the Mashpee Wampanoag School. They learned so many cultural components of learning. I mean, when they came home one day, they said, "Papa, I get to pluck a duck today." And I said, "That's wonderful." They actually had one of the hunters from our tribe that came in, and he took the duck and showed them how to dress it to be able to eat it. Well, that's a practical skill that most children aren't taught in any of your schools, I'm sure. But they're also taught about their culture, and they're taught about their language. And those are the most invaluable years for these children. And I'm so happy that they had the opportunity to spend those 3 years doing that. But that's just 2. And I think there was only 6 other classmates that they had at the time. So we need to expand upon that, but also bring that out to the rest of the world to be able to see.
We have a question about decolonization in museums. So this is from the University of St Andrews. They're asking, in your opinion, how do you think this project and cultural exchange relates to museum decolonization and efforts to repatriate and heal relationships between museums with colonial histories and Indigenous peoples?
That's okay. It is long, and I think I'll just touch on part of that, which is I think there's a huge importance to having art and culture in the exhibitions at museums. And so I look at the week 2 that we're constructing today as really a large art installation that's there to share a larger message. But it invites people in. Both literally you're invited into this week 2 to come in and experience it, but it invites you in as well to question history. Why is it here? What's the story behind it? To come into the museum and start to engage in the larger dialogue that's in the panels, the videos. But you need that visual piece that engages them, allows them to touch it, allows them to smell it. When you have that with art, I think people then are more likely to then understand or want to understand the larger story that's being told within that museum. And so that's why it was important for us to come here and spend the time to put this piece together, because without it, I think that the exhibit is lacking. And so we want to make sure that we gave that opportunity to you and to the children, most importantly, to be able to play with it and understand it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've seen in the standard of museum practices throughout the years is there's a tendency of museums to love the objects but not the people who made them. And that's really a shame, because the living people who have knowledge and cultural understanding of these objects bring so much more to the objects that you're looking at than if it's just a object without context or understanding. So this is, I think, a great step to include us as living, breathing people with an actual culture and understanding, and maybe some expertise about who we are. And that's something that's just really been lacking in the museum world for so long. This idea that you can just go and pluck out an object from a culture and put it on a wall and make up your own mind about what it might mean, that's been the norm. And I'm happy to see that there's something that's pulling away from that looks to the people who this object comes from and asks them what it means to them and why it's important to them. Ask us what it is that we might want to share with the rest of the world, rather than maybe taking the things from us with or without our permission. A lot of times without permission. To display without the context. And some of these objects that really do need to be repatriated because they mean so much to our history. And if they're kept, I mean, I've gone through museum collections and you see these beautiful treasures that mean so much to us, and they're just in a box collecting dust. Not only are they not appreciated by the museum itself, but they're kept from the people who really could benefit and use these things and have a cultural context for what they mean to them today. So certainly repatriation needs to happen with a ton of objects, especially ones that were taken without permission. But to have something like this move into its place is really important because the context of having living, breathing people really makes these objects so much more than objects. And that's where the real value comes in with cultural exchange.
Thank you. We really appreciate having you with us. I've been privileged to be spending a lot of time with you all this week, but I'm still learning so much just sitting here listening to your answers today. So the same person asks, did you have agency and control over the project's aims and outlooks in ways that were meaningful and beneficial for you?
Every project that we've undertaken, we maintain complete control over the content, the message, the images that are shared, and that's important to us. And I think that's the important piece, as Hartman was talking about, is putting things into context, into our context, and allowing us to have control over the history that we're sharing, the artifacts that we're sharing, the art that we're sharing. We're not asking you to interpret it in your own way, but we're instead asking that we share it in the way that we understand it. And then allowing you to then come to your own conclusions after that. And so we take that with everything. We do not, and we've actually turned away museums several times where they've sat down and they said, we'd really like to work with you on this exhibition, and here's what it's going to do, and here's what it's going to say. We back up and like, look, I want you first to understand that if we start to go down this road, that you're not going to be able to dictate what is actually put up on those walls, or what's going to be said in this video, or what images are going to be shared. And we will do. There's a lot of stories that we get into that are extremely difficult for us to share and very emotional, especially when we start talking about periods where 80 to 90% of our ancestors died within just a few short years. And we have to tell that story, and we have to tell it in a way that acknowledges the emotion, because that's something that can be taken out of the history books so often. So often it's history and it's just shared, and there's no emotion in it. It's just like, okay, this happened between these periods, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. You can't have 90% of the people wiped out in 3 years and not stop to think about the impact that it had on the people that were left behind. And that's the perspective that we're able to share, and we demand that we put that in. And so we've had absolute control over everything that we put in. But I think that's the way it should be. I wouldn't want to put an exhibition up about, Jewish Americans without allowing that people to come in and say, here's what it's going to look like. Here's what it's going to say. And for you as a Native American to come in here and tell me, I really think that we should say that a different way, that's bull. You can't do that. And so every partner that we've had has known that immediately right from the start. Everything from the schools and museums to nonprofits, television shows, it's all absolute control, or go find somebody else because we don't want to work with you.
The Elizabethan Academy asks, what have you learned about our culture during your visit so far? And a little bit what can we learn from you, but we'll start with the first one.
Well, one I learned that apparently if you shake one person's hand at a table, you have to then walk your way around and shake every other person's hand at that table as well, whether you like them or not. It's a lot of similarities. It's surprising to see some of the things, but you also as well have to walk carefully and literally in homes that we're sharing. We have the most wonderful families that have put them up, and you feel like you can feel the emotion and the love of them too, and that's what you need to I guess for me to take away is that there's love, that you can see it. You see it when you walk out their door, and they're like, like, do you have enough food? Because they care. It's not because they're just there being like, well, this is my responsibility. It was written down on a piece of paper that I need to provide them with, this. But no, they really care, and you stay up late at your pubs. I love your pubs. I love it, and we love the fact that you have a town hall that has a bar in it. We would never do that. That is so not. I mean, one thing that did not come over on the Mayflower was that ideal to drink a beer in your town hall. You said over some really uptight. They were uptight. I understand why you kicked them out. Yeah, you said so uptight, and they went to lie, and then I go there. They were lying for a couple days. And they were like, "Get these people the hell out of here. They are not fun at all." And they sent them back, and then you sent them over to hang out with us after a play as well. So we were like really in a depressing state at that point. And then you sent us some more depressing people. They just kind of piled that on. So now I'm not able to. I mean, up until a couple of years ago, we couldn't even buy alcohol on Sundays. I mean, this is what you left us with. But we've definitely taken away the fact that there's mutual respect for who we are, and in turn now we have respect for you. And I gotta be honest, I don't think when we got off the plane we were sure that there was going to be respect. On both sides. I didn't know whether or not I was going to necessarily respect the community and the people that we met here, but I do because I think that you care.
For me, I was, Steve asked me to come, I was like, hey, all right, let's go check it out. I haven't been here since I was a kid, and so it gave me an opportunity to come back and see areas where I lived. I'm not going to take my age. I'm about 75.
Native Americans look very young. We age very well.
I enjoyed my time. I was here as a little kid, and I had a great time. But this time it was better because I was an adult. I actually had to come out to the club, and it's a totally different experience as an adult. Your views change from a kid to an adult, honestly. I've had a great time with Kathy Hostess and her husband Graham, and even Hartman was adjusting the time. He slept the first day or two. I was staying awake because I knew what was going to happen with jet lag and everything like that. You guys have just been wonderful. The questions, I love the accents. I love them. I have to bring someone home with me. And it's just been a pleasure. The tea and organic food and different things like that. I plan on coming back. So this project was wonderful. To share our history and our culture with you guys, and for me to kind of really come back and connect with you guys' culture. What's the word? Cheers.
Yeah, I guess I had an impression that Brits were all very stiff, but I'm finding that not to be the truth. There's a politeness and a sense of manners and respect that's maybe sort of interpreted as stiffness, but it's not stiff at all. So that's something that I'm surprised to see, and it wasn't what I expected. And that's been nice for me. I guess that's the biggest thing that was like, oh wow, and I'm surprised I haven't seen anybody
I'm not sure what more to say. I mean, just the warmth and the generosity of everybody that we've come across it's just been spectacular. It's really nice to be able to come someplace and tell your story, be able to express yourself in our indigenous ways, and for people to be so attentive and just being as kind as you are. I just thank you all very, very much for having us. Really.
And I'm a member of the Morris dancing group. I'm a fan of the snowballs dancing.
We will return the favor on Saturday and expect all of you to come and dance with us.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you all very much. Yeah, do come and join us on Saturday. We're having cultural showcases at the museum. There's going to be singing and dancing. It's going to be fabulous. There are 11 and 1 and 3. There are some leaflets around. I think we've got time for just a few questions from the audience. My friend Tim is going to walk around the microphone. We've got just a couple of questions anyone's wanting to ask while we have these guys here. They've been doing such a good job interpreting things for us.
Yeah.
Oh.
Just to ask really, how can we find out more about your story?
Google. I think so. We have, there's a pretty good collection of information that we've put together, both on things like Vimeo, and as well as with some of the museum exhibitions that we've had. You can also as well certainly try and, we have traveling exhibits as well that are going throughout the country. So you can try and petition to have some of those come here. But I think, honestly, I think having a thirst for understanding history and going out and wanting to do the research, you'll find a wealth of information. It's not hard to find. I mean, these Europeans, you guys came over and you were very brutal. I mean, you were direct, you broke out everything's interactions, without indifference. I mean, they just documented it. It's just the fact that you guys were like, holy crap, we don't want to talk about that. But it's right there. So yeah, go do a little research and I think you'll find a lot.
Yeah, I guess I'll just echo that. It's, if you go looking, you'll find it. But as well as Google, there's also, find books on Amazon. Amazon, I guess, not Amazon if you can help it. Yeah. Amazon seems, but they're out there. That's the best way. And it's certainly not something that's accessible to everybody. But if you get the opportunity to come across the water, come and check us out. Check us out in southeastern Massachusetts. Check us out in southern New England. Come learn about Wampanoag people or our sister tribes. We have a museum there. We have a great powwow. It's usually a 3-day festival. Songs, dances, food, crafts. Great time. Or the Pequot Museum, the Shinnecock Museum. They're in southern New England as well. So these are opportunities that may not be accessible to everybody, but if you get the chance, certainly come and check us out. There's a lot to see there as well. But yeah, there's some short films that are around and about. Even if you look far enough back, you can find the people of the first light that grandfather produced. What was that, the mid-80s? And there's television interviews. There's lots of stuff that's out there. Go looking. That's I guess the best advice.
Yes, just a quick one actually. Do you still make use of your native language? Is it taught to the younger generation?
Use the one.
Nikis Nakamun Wampanoag Kaskis Kakis. Yes, I speak Wampanoag every day. It's something for me. I moved back to Massachusetts Massachusetts in 2000. I was going to establish my residency so I could get affordable access to college, and it was going to take me about a year, and I was going to go and learn history and teach history. And I thought, oh, I'll just take a couple language classes, learn how to say a couple things here and there. And 10 years later, I found myself, teaching the language and just really amazed with how much cultural information comes out of the language itself. It's so much that you can learn about how people view the world and think and see, what's happening around them, what they value, what they care about. Wampanoag has a real emphasis on relationship and kinship terms. It's very, very specific to not leave room for confusion. We have two kinds of we. So I can say, hey, come on everybody, we're here and we're enjoying the night. I think that we're having a good time. Yeah, are we having a good time? Yeah. Or I can say a different kind of we. That, well, we are almost done speaking tonight. But that's not you, so you don't have any confusion, but we can say, oh, we are all going fishing, or we're going to go fishing now. We have kinship terms that, there's no single word for mother, there's no single word for friend, there's no single word for enemy. But there is a word for my friend, for my mother, for my enemy. There's a word for your friend, your mother, your enemy, our friend, their friend. Because that relationship between the two people is really important. And that's something that's, I think really sort of speaks to the culture of interdependence. It's really important and valuable to us. So I just was so amazed. I thought, I learned how to say a couple things, introduce myself, say my name, or say hello. I ended up learning so much more about our cultural worldview by studying the language. So it's around, it's being revitalized. We were very fortunate to have, as Stephen said, the English very quickly set to writing down a whole bunch, and they wanted to teach us to read and write so we could learn the scripture. Eliot went out and tried to translate the Bible himself and tried to go out preaching it, and found that every place he went, people would laugh at him because his language skills were so bad. So he realized you better get some native speakers to do the translation work. And he got about 50 different people to help with the translation of the Bible. And he taught them the skills of reading and writing so that they could do this translation work. And very quickly, we saw the value of this set of tools and started to teach each other. And not counting you folks who stayed over here on the island, but within New England, by 1640, there was more Wampanoag people literate in Wampanoag, monolingual Wampanoag speakers, than there were English people literate in English. So we really saw the value of these tools. We documented so much. We have this great wealth of written material that we get to draw from. But when the language project started in 1993 or 94? At that point, there were no fluent speakers. And there was only fragments of the language that remained. The Lord's Prayer, some simple sayings, some words, some names, some place names. That's what survived. But we were very fortunate to have one of the largest bodies of written documentation of any Amerindian language in its unchanged form. So we're very fortunate to have that. And it's helped us to really revitalize the language. And it's one of the most successful language revitalization projects there's ever been. There's a great film on that which should be accessible to folks. We Are Still Here. And that's all about the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project. So if you get a chance to check that out, that's also something that's accessible and out there and easy to find. So.
I've got Michelle?
Yeah, is there a national movement of yours, or is it individual tribes that are going to take things forward? And do you include the Canadians, natives, with your tribes?
Yeah, so there is a national movement. I think it probably really started to take steam probably in the late 1960s with the American Indian movement. As of recently, it's become a lot stronger, I believe, because we have other issues that are of similar nature. So Black Lives Matter, for instance, those again, because I talked about before that I feel like in the eyes of some in our society, you know, Native Americans are minority of a minority. So I say that meaning we are such a small percentage that they feel as though it's okay to ignore. You know, the issues that we've been raising for a long time. So you have sort of now this larger movement that is, that's also moving with the American Indian movement that's been going on for quite a long time. And no, I don't think that we acknowledge that our borders stop at the lines that were created at the United States of America. And, you know, the same thing with South America as well. You know, our native ties didn't recognize a line that was drawn on a map. You know, that's not the way it went, but I'm sure others have a lot more to say on that. Maybe not. Yeah. No, I think we're gonna.
So there isn't a continent movement that is coherent.
Coherent, sometimes.
Angry? Yes.
Yeah, you know, but there are overarching issues of the impacts of colonization on colonized people. And we share so much that bonds us together, whether in Mexico, Canada, or the States. And we have tribes that go back to before any of these nations existed. So, you know, Wampanoag, the actual larger confederacy that we belong to, goes into the Canadian Maritimes. And I'm Wampanoag, but we also have Mi'kmaq relatives that we descend from. They are from Prince Edward Island. That's my family as well. And we are related people. We are part of the larger confederacy of Wampanoag, the Dogman. So that includes everything south of the St. Lawrence and east of the Hudson. So that cuts into what they now call Canada. We've been able to mend a lot of fences between what, you know, where tribes have previously had conflict with one another, to deal with the common problems of being excluded and being oppressed by this federal system, and then seeing and recognize that there's a common system that happened in Canada, in Mexico. You know, the Zapatistas rose up in 1994 or 1994, yeah, and they really stood on a platform of indigenous rights to earn to sustain themselves from the land, and that was really important to them. And they rose up largely as indigenous people, and we see that, and it was really exciting for me to see 1 million Indians marching on Mexico City. That's how I saw them. There are 1 million Indians marching on Mexico City. And that was terribly exciting to me. We look at the mission system that happened in Mexico, and it's the same as the boarding school system that happened in the States. It's the same as the boarding school system that's happened in Canada. So across the board, we saw that these schools were put in place to, you know, violently re-educate children. We've all experienced that. We see that throughout Canada, the United States, Mexico, Honduras, on down to the tip of South America, we see that femicide is a big problem, and missing and murdered indigenous women is a huge problem. We understand that land loss is a huge problem, that resource extraction from fossil fuel companies to gold extraction or to extraction of timber is constantly pushing aside Native people's jurisdictional authority over their territories. So this is something that bonds us together across these borders. And you know, the ability together and support one another is absolutely fundamental to being able to achieve any sort of success, because we are less than 1% of the population for the most part. You look at so many times the statistics, you look down the statistics up, white people, black people, Asians, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And where are the Native people? They just aren't even included in the statistics.
I always thought they were other.
Sometimes we get lumped into other, but sometimes we're simply left out. And that's just the truth of the matter. Sometimes we're just left out. Oftentimes we're just left out. So that's something that we, if we don't support one another, then really we're not going to be able to have any kind of voice. So we've recognized that, and it's a matter of survival for us, because it was really amazing to be at Standing Rock and see tribes from across the country, across the northern hemisphere, and really we even had Maori people and Sami people come to support us there, because this is an issue that we see again and again and again. Where there was an oil pipeline and it was enslaved to go across the river in one place. A small community of largely white folks had a town meeting, and they decided that they didn't want it in their town. And so they moved it right onto the reservation. It was going to cut right across the water supply for that reservation. And that's, the exact thing that happened. And as soon as we said, hey, we don't want it here either, well, they send the bulldozers, and they send the state troopers, and they send the police, and they send the private security forces like Tiger Swan and other people with their attack dogs and their, it was absolutely insane, and yet for this other community, all it took was a town council vote, and they took that, and that was fine. But for us to dare to say no to ruining the resources that we depend on is such an affront to this colonial system that they had to bring down the full weight of everything that was in the legal power of the United States to put a stop to that resistance. So we have to stand together as Indigenous people if we want to have any sort of success, and that's what we've seen, is that people tend to show up for one another. As a Wampanoag person, showed up in the Dakotas to stand up with them. When I see that folks had trouble in Louisiana, I showed up there to help them. I've shown up a number of places to support people, because I would hope that when we have issues as Wampanoag people that we might get support from other Native folks as well. We certainly don't have the strength of numbers in our little town to do it on our own. So.
I just want to say very, very quickly, well, one, this congregation, this Methodist church has been very kind to provide us lunch every single day.
Absolutely.
Been not overlooked on our part. But since that lunch as well, we've been working very long days, so I think we're all very thirsty and hungry. So I don't want you to think that it's rude that we don't want to necessarily stop and spend an hour mingling here, but instead I would say come next door, because we're going to go right next door. We're going to get some food, we're going to get some drinks. You want to come and mingle with us, come over there, let's have a beer, and we can chat further.
Questions, but if you do want to hear more, we're going to be having a follow-up conference in December. This is at the end of the project, actually. We've got a virtual conference coming up, so look out on our website, pilgrimroots.org, for information about that. And thank you all for coming to what I think you'll agree has been a really fascinating and moving evening.
Absolutely.
And we hope you'll come and engage with the project on Saturday. We're going to have a great day together then as well. Thank you very much. And thanks, first of all, to you all for sharing your wisdom generously.
Thank you.